皆様、本日は日本 GIF オンラインセミナー、自由で開かれたインド太平洋とアフリカ東海岸物流回廊へのご参加をありがとうございました。なお、最初にお詫び申し上げます。本来、このオンラインセミナーは午後2時から開始する予定でございましたが、当方の手違いで午後2時半からにズーム会議を設営してしまいました。そのために開始を30分遅らせる必要が生じてしまいました。皆様に多大なご迷惑をおかけしたことを深くお詫びいたします。それではまず、このセミナーは最初にブレンドン・キャノン先生の講演から見ていただきます。ブレンドン・キャノン先生の講演は約30分です。質問は Zoom での Q&A 機能によりお寄せください。講演の最中でも構いません。なお、本日は逐次通訳を質疑応答の際には提供いたしております。それではビデオ、動画をお願いいたします。
Good day, and greetings from Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. My name is Brendan Cannon, and I'll be speaking to you today about Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific and East Africa's transport corridors. As a continent, Africa suffers from two geographic problems, a lack of natural deepwater ports, as well as navigable rivers. These have hampered the development of much of the continent, not only in terms of industrialization and economic diversification, but also in terms of physical access to certain regions. Nowhere is this more pronounced than in Eastern Africa, a region stretching from the Horn of Africa in the north to Kenya and the Great Lakes states, to Tanzania and down south to Mozambique and its border with South Africa. Over the first 2 decades of the 21st century, several new port facilities and transport corridors have been announced across Eastern Africa. These form the subject of my presentation today, during which I will describe and evaluate the ports and transport corridors in terms of the region's economic and political integration, as well as its development trajectory. This is significant because some of Eastern Africa's transport corridors represent potential opportunities for Japan and other like-minded states to re-engage with this critically important region, thereby expanding their influence through informed policy planning, a strategic vision, and the rollout of quality infrastructure. Transport and critical infrastructure corridors often form naturally along navigable rivers, with ports at their terminus. They are integrated networks of infrastructure within a geographic area designed to stimulate economic development and connect different economic agents in a particular area. Corridors may be developed in a country or between countries. In Eastern Africa, the lack of navigable rivers has frustrated the development of transport corridors and had a major impact on politics and economies. It's not that Africa lacks rivers. Rather, given Africa's topography, the rivers often form a series of waterfalls or plunge into deep gorges, such as that shown in this slide. Eastern Africa's lack of natural deepwater ports has also inhibited the creation and growth of corridors. As such, the region currently counts only 4 natural deepwater ports: Djibouti, shown here in the slide, and Mombasa, Dar es Salaam, and Maputo. In sum, these ports supply Eastern Africa with over 90% of imports and offer the primary window for the region's exports. They should be understood as both the point of departure from, as well as the entrance to, their respective corridors. Nevertheless, the value of each port in their corridors is mixed, given the region's challenging geography, as well as a variety of political and economic impediments. Mombasa, shown here in this slide, as well as Djibouti, are the only major East African ports that exhibit both viable transport corridors and deepwater port facilities. They both form the terminus of major transport and critical infrastructure corridors. Mombasa is the entrance to the interior of Kenya, as well as the Great Lakes states of Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. It also serves South Sudan. Djibouti, on the other hand, serves only 2 states, tiny Djibouti, where the port is located, and massive, economically, politically, and population-wise, Ethiopia. Given their importance, both ports have seen large-scale expansion, development, and refurbishment that remains ongoing. Dar es Salaam, shown here in Tanzania, and Maputo in Mozambique, are East Africa's other natural deepwater ports. They are vitally important to cities they serve, as well as the import and export of goods, but they serve localized regions in particular states, not transport or economic corridors. The dearth of ports and viable economic and transport corridors has led governments in Eastern Africa to embark on projects with the goal of developing corridors serviced by new or expanded port facilities. Natural resource deposits and their export potential have also led governments, in concert with partners from external states such as Japan, to embark on the process of building port facilities, railroads, roads, and other transport infrastructure. This has been helped by the fact that port building and dredging are common and advanced enough to allow such possibilities, and thus for the need for natural deepwater ports, while optimal, is no longer a prerequisite. These actions, taken separately and begun at different times for multiple regions, have resulted in a number of emergent economic and transport corridors serviced by ports in the making. These are, from north to south, Lamu in Kenya, Tanga in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and Nacala in Mozambique. Along with Mombasa, these ports and transport corridors form the subject of this presentation. Using a comparative method and qualitative approach, I will offer an evaluation of the 5 main transport corridors in the region during the course of this presentation. In turn, I will offer policy recommendations in relation to whether strategic planning should be carried out that will complement short and long-term national interests and policy development in Japan, particularly as it relates to Japan's Free and Open Indo-Pacific Vision, or Foip. I plan to contextualize my research within Japan's Free and Open Indo-Pacific framework and therefore provide recommendations that may be helpful in the development and operationalization of policies and strategies across East Africa and the Western Indian Ocean Basin. In addition, my presentation today will touch on China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, to provide a basic understanding of the depth and breadth of China's penetration into the region. In doing so, I believe we can arrive at a consensus regarding whether one or all of the corridors remain open to Japan and its partners from the standpoint of economic, security, and political investment. First, I'd like to talk about China. China's growing role on the continent has, since 2013, been performed under the auspices of the Belt and Road Initiative. Beijing defends the BRI as a strategy that seeks to connect China with Africa and Europe via land and maritime networks, with the aim of improving regional integration, increasing trade, and stimulating economic growth. Regardless of the geopolitical initiative's numerous detractions, such as debt trap diplomacy, China's Belt and Road Initiative-related projects have flooded Eastern Africa and have come to overshadow the development efforts of many other external states, such as Japan, which have a longer history in the region. In East Africa, for instance, China has built a standard gauge railway in Ethiopia connecting Addis Ababa, the capital, to the port of Djibouti for a reported $3.6 billion. Chinese companies are also prospecting for oil and gas in the region. Further south, China has completed the first and arguably most critical section of a $3.4 billion railroad that runs from the port of Mombasa to Kenya's capital, Nairobi. In Tanzania, railroads are also being built by the Chinese. China is the biggest investor in Uganda's oil sector as well, and in Mozambique, several major projects like the Maputo Bay Bridge and fishing ports have been completed and put into operation by Chinese companies with Chinese-financed loans. Beijing's influence seems unrivaled across the region to the casual observer. Transport infrastructure nodes like ports are thus of increased value, given the role they play as both entry and exit points to the continent. Ports, besides being bases for the handling of cargo, are often the locus of military bases as well, as exemplified by Djibouti, where both Chinese and Japanese military bases exist. Resource mercantilism continues to remain highly relevant in terms of understanding the actions of outside states such as Japan and China. Resource mercantilism refers to the use of state-driven policies or strategies by a resource-dependent state such as Japan to enable its firms to secure a stable supply of resources outside of its borders. As a response to China's Belt and Road Initiative and a strategy of support for Japan's business and political interests, former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe unveiled Japan's concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific in 2016 at the 6th Summit of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, or TICAD. This was held in Nairobi. Since then, the free and open Indo-Pacific terminology and concept has been picked up by Japan's like-minded partners to include the United States and India. Indeed, the Indo-Pacific has become a vehicle for the creation of and operationalization of a host of official policies across the Indo-Pacific. As importantly, the free and open Indo-Pacific has been used by Tokyo to engage with and encourage Japanese businesses and consulting firms to explore overseas markets, paying particular attention to the Western Indian Ocean Basin and Eastern Africa. The increasingly intense competition for infrastructure development and projects has led both Japan and China to explore strategies and policies that may bolster their respective standing in Eastern Africa. This competition for projects in the region is driven, in part, by the perception in Tokyo, as well as Beijing, that the key to maintaining and expanding their respective geopolitical influence resides in targeted, well-informed strategic planning and policy making, as well as building and engaging in the development of transport and economic corridors across the region. My research findings vis-a-vis these transport corridors and the port facilities that serve them are as follows. Lamu, on the northeastern coast of Kenya, is an ancient port city, located on an island about 240 kilometers north of Mombasa. It's a remote tourist destination, and most traffic still comes by air or sea. Lamu's nascent importance comes from the so-called Lamu Port, South Sudan, Ethiopia Transport Corridor, also known as the Lamu Corridor, or LAPSET, its acronym. LAPSET is a transport and infrastructure project that aims to cut overdependence on Kenya's main port of Mombasa, as well as open Kenya's largely underdeveloped northern frontier through the creation of a second transport corridor. The LAPSET corridor comprises two key elements. One, an infrastructure corridor stretching from Lamu across northern Kenya into Uganda with spurs into Ethiopia as well as South Sudan. Two, an economic corridor and location of industrial investments on about 50 kilometers on either side of the corridor. The infrastructure corridor may eventually include a port at Manda Bay, pictured here, just north of the old town of Lamu, with a railroad with spurs to Juba, South Sudan, and Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as well as oil pipelines. This project gathered steam after 2012 and the discovery of oil in northwestern Kenya. Nevertheless, little progress has been made on basic infrastructure by mid-2021. Only the first berth out of 3 at Lamu Port has been completed. A further 29 berths are meant to be built. The Lamu corridor is beset by numerous difficulties. Foremost is the geographic remoteness of both Lamu and its Manda Bay port, as well as the land corridor it passes through. The northeast and northwest of Kenya contain low-density populations and have remained marginalized when compared to the population centers far to the south. While the economic motivation for LAPSET appears sound on certain levels, the geopolitical aspects of tying Kenya's north to its center seem to play the most important role in motivating the Kenyan government to pursue the project. The northeast, for instance, is increasingly important to Kenya given its ongoing maritime border dispute with Somalia and the oil and gas blocks located offshore. Similarly, the northwest holds all of Kenya's proven onshore oil reserves. Both regions are characterized, historically and currently, by widespread insecurity, especially political instability, and herein lies more of the rationale for the LAPSET corridor. By providing economic viability to the citizens of northern Kenya, the government hopes to integrate the region with the rest of the country and stamp out insecurity in the process, bringing much needed revenue from the export of oil, the revenues from the port, and the economic linkages from neighboring states. Beyond the instability and political violence that hamper the corridor's development, more commercially viable alternative pipeline options have come to the fore since 2015. These include a pipeline from Uganda's oil fields through Tanzania to the port of Tanga, as well as other pipeline routes through Ethiopia. In addition, low oil prices have also negatively affected Lapset's commercial prospects. Now, Japan has exhibited little interest in Lapset thus far. Preliminary findings, nevertheless, indicate the Lamu corridor may be of interest on account of Tokyo's evolving free and open Indo-Pacific vision, as well as the significant Japanese investment in neighboring countries, primarily Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, for example, Japan Tobacco has invested heavily, and Sumitomo is currently working with Vodafone Group to procure one of 2 licenses in relation to the liberalization of the telecommunications sector in what is the second most populous country in Africa. Geopolitically, Ethiopia is the keystone of the Horn of Africa and offers huge economic and political potential for Japan. Now, the Mombasa Corridor in Kenya, also known as the Northern Corridor, is the most well-established and economically important in East Africa. Stretching thousands of kilometers, it crosses much of East and Central Africa, from Kenya to Uganda, and thence to South Sudan, Rwanda, Burundi, and into the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. The corridor developed because of the deepwater port of Mombasa and has been operational for over 100 years. It is served by a road network, railways, including the new Chinese-built railroad pictured here, rail lake transport, inland water routes, and inland container depots. Another spur of the railroad in Kenya is supposed to connect Nairobi with the Ugandan border, but that depends on funding coming from either China or another state such as Japan. Japan has invested heavily in Kenya. The Mombasa corridor, and more particularly the port of Mombasa, have been the main focus of Japanese investment and development aid, as well as its geopolitical and strategic interest. Mombasa is well understood to hold the key to East Africa. Its importance should not be understated. It is also at the port of Mombasa that Japan's strengths and staying power in the region are perhaps best on display. According to my research, Japan has used the Mombasa corridor as something of a laboratory when it comes to inducing Japanese companies and consulting firms to consider work in Africa. Most of this development is centered on Mombasa itself, including the development of roads and port facilities. For example, Japan Ports Consulting is in the midst of a $247 million overhaul and expansion of the port of Mombasa. Nippon Koei, on the other hand, is responsible for the larger development and building of special economic zones, berths, bridges, and bypasses. Given these developments, the port and Japanese involvement therein may offer a compelling counterpart to China's aggressive Belt and Road Initiative, and may act as a guide to the complications of operating in the highly contested region of East Africa. The Tanga Transport Corridor in northern Tanzania is currently anchored by 2 projects. First, the improvement of Tanga Port, the second largest in Tanzania, and second, the East Africa crude oil pipeline, also known as the Uganda-Tanzania crude oil pipeline. The construction of the pipelines is supposed to transport oil from Uganda's oil fields to Tanga Port. The proposed pipeline will be the longest heated crude oil pipeline in the world, with most oil exports going to China. Tanzania's other much larger port, Dar es Salaam, has a transport and economic corridor running west into upland Tanzania, and it's centered on the port. It accounts for over 90% of the country's cargo traffic. It is reportedly the 4th largest port on Africa's Indian Ocean coastline after Durban in South Africa, Mombasa in Kenya, and Maputo in Mozambique. Tanzania has 2 regional transport corridors, the Central and Southern corridors. In the Central corridor, most freight is transported by road. The long distances involved, however, mean that rail transport would likely be cheaper and more cost efficient. Like Kenya to the north, Tanzania's railways are often decades old and decrepit. Freight to and from Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, and the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo must be transported by road, given limited capacity in rail connections. On the other hand, the southern corridor provides access to the northern and central provinces of Zambia, Malawi, and southern DRC. But its transportation capacity and the age of its infrastructure also limit its potential. Now lastly, Nacala in northern Mozambique has possibly the best natural harbor for port facilities south of Mombasa. The port as well as the transport corridor have been the focus of Japanese investment and interest over the past decade. This is because the Nacala Logistics Corridor offered a great deal of potential as a connector to areas across Southeast Africa. At the height of the corridor's planning in circa 2012, the corridor, to include the construction and management of railways, highways, ports, and airports to serve Mozambique and Malawi, as well as points further afield in Zambia and Zimbabwe, was ongoing. In terms of railways, new trackage was to be constructed along with rebuilding of existing rail lines. The export of coal from mines in western Mozambique near Tete, as shown on the map here, to the port of Nacala via Malawi provided the impetus for companies and governments to invest in the corridor. The main investor was the Brazilian mining company Vale, which purchased a majority ownership in the Nacala Railway in 2010. This marked the beginning phase of a project to develop the rail access to a deepwater port at Nacala. Japan's Mitsui worked with Vale on the export of coal and the development of the port. Unfortunately, both have left the project. The costs were reportedly too high and the gains too low. Some of this had to do with the quality of the coal being mined. The primary objective, for Japan at least, was to mine and export high-grade coal for making steel. Instead, the coal from western Mozambique was low-grade and therefore sold cheaply to be burned for electrical power. My results lead me to assess that, to varying degrees, all corridors remain open to Japan and like-minded partners from the standpoint of economic security and political investment. However, they come with significant caveats. This is for four interrelated reasons. First, the level of development of the corridors. Second, the level of interest and investment in the ports and corridors. Third, the penetration of China or other actors. And fourth, regional, national, or local conditions that either inhibit or may further promote the corridor's development. A critical evaluation of Lamu in Kenya indicates that the lack of development along the Lamu corridor over the past decade has much to do with the ongoing conflict in South Sudan. While both Uganda and Kenya have reserves of oil, they are smaller than those of South Sudan and contain much lower grades of oil that are difficult and expensive to extract and transport. In addition, while the Lamu corridor was conceived prior to Kenya's discovery of oil in 2012, Kenya's oil reserves were quickly understood to provide the funding for the Lapset corridor. Prior to that, nevertheless, it was tacitly understood that South Sudan's high-grade, easy-to-extract oil would provide the true economic and investment rationale for the entire corridor. In terms of Japan's involvement with the corridor, the research found that little has been done since 2010 and 12. While the Japanese government and businesses do have interests in Uganda, the oil extractive industry, for example, is dominated by France and China. Both companies are mature and therefore severely limit the space for involvement by Japanese companies. In Kenya, Total, France's Total, has also gained controlling stakes in the oil field, thus limiting potential oil investments for Japanese companies. In addition, low population densities mentioned before limit the potential for the development of viable markets across northern Kenya. Despite the potential pitfalls bedeviling the corridor, I do believe Lamu Port and related corridors should be the topic of further consideration. This is on account of the low level of development along the Lamu corridor, which offers great opportunities, particularly for Japan's consulting and construction firms. In addition, the low level of Chinese penetration and high political will for the project in Nairobi to build the corridor mean that Japan could play a significant role in its development. More specifically, Lamu not only represents the potential terminus of onshore oil exports, but will certainly play a major role in any offshore oil development. Kenya's offshore hydrocarbon reserves dwarf those onshore, and oil blocks have already been auctioned off to major oil players such as Italy's Eni. In addition, the growing political and economic clout of both Kenya and Ethiopia in East Africa mean the two states will continue to push for investments and development along their sizable common border, particularly in terms of trade and transport. This may lead to significant consulting, construction, and development work for Japan. The Mombasa corridor has been and continues to be the gateway to East Africa. Japan has invested heavily in the development of Mombasa and the related transport corridor over the past decades. Mombasa, Nairobi, and the corridor that runs between them is attractive because of the amount of industry along it, as well as its large population. The Mombasa corridor therefore deserves to be the subject of further evaluation and the development of policy frameworks. This is further underscored by the steady interest and investment in the port and corridor by Japan. In addition, the high penetration of China in Mombasa and along the corridor is a positive development overall, albeit perhaps counterintuitive. Now let me be clear, growing Chinese investment and interest in Kenya have resulted in a perception that Kenya may no longer be a viable option for business for anybody but China. This seems to be an exaggeration given the evidence on hand. In fact, both Chinese and Japanese projects largely complement one another in and around Mombasa and the corridor, and potentially open avenues for further development and investment. There are negatives, of course. It is true that Kenya owes China millions of dollars for massive infrastructure projects, such as railroads, but Kenya's government appears to be hedging its bets thus far and offering infrastructure and development projects to numerous states. This bodes well for Japan's consultants in particular. In addition, the road expansion programs ongoing across the country, as well as the railroad and expanded port, mean that better business opportunities may be available for Japanese companies. Lastly, the scale of work along the corridor, let alone at the port of Mombasa, mean that there may be enough work for Japan, China, and other actors for many years to come. This clearly demonstrates that the development of policy frameworks and strategies that may support Japan's continued engagement along the Mombasa corridor under the rubric of the Free and Open Indo-Pacific should be explored. Now, the Tonga corridor may represent the least viable transport corridor in East Africa in terms of economics. The oil pipeline is at the preliminary stages. In addition, the low population density and lack of transport infrastructure point to a lack of opportunities beyond consulting work. Consulting, however, it's worth pointing out, is one of Japan's greatest strengths and may be used to good effect along the Tonga route to further eventual Japanese investments and interests. Nevertheless, there are indications that Tanzania has traditionally preferred to work with China, though this could be changing under its new president. In terms of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, while the corridors connected to the port look impressive, there seem to be serious structural and systemic issues that may hamper growth and thus Japan's involvement. First, the port of Dar es Salaam may be large, but it is inefficient and expensive when compared to its competitor Mombasa. Second, the distances involved, poor transport infrastructure, and low population densities mean that traffic routed west from Dar es Salaam is inefficient and costly when compared to the Mombasa corridor in Kenya. Third, the corridor runs to northern Zambia, far away from its southern population centers and transport corridors. This means that Zambian copper must still be transported either south to South Africa, southeast through Mozambique, or west through Angola, rather than the closer option through Tanzania. And then finally, Lake Tanganyika on Tanzania's western border acts as a significant barrier to trade. Given the political changes after the unexpected death of Tanzanian President John Magufuli in early 2021 have occurred, Tanzania may nonetheless hold potential for Japan and its free and open Indo-Pacific vision in the future. While Tanzania has proven difficult in the past for Japan, nearly a decade of work has been ongoing by Tokyo. This began with the 2013 visit to Tanzania of current Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi, who, at the time, was Minister of METI. This marked the first ever visit by a METI official to Tanzania outside multilateral conferences. Now finally, we'll talk about Nacala in Mozambique. 10 years ago, Nacala had the most potential of any transport and economic corridor in Eastern Africa, apart from Mombasa. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case. Political violence and economic situations have drastically altered the calculus and mean that Nacala, for the time being, no longer represents a viable corridor. In terms of project and investment in Eastern Africa, certain countries, namely Kenya and Ethiopia, figure more prominently in Japan's strategies of political and economic engagement, both prior to and after the unveiling of Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific. Given that Kenya has historically fostered a more relaxed and liberal market environment that is conducive to Japanese involvement, it represents the prime location for policy-making development and strategic planning vis-à-vis the region's transport and economic corridors, within the context of Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision and those of like-minded partners. To conclude, further strategic planning and development of policies related to Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision are highly suggested into the economic and transport corridors that emanate from Mombasa first, Lamu second, Dar es Salaam third, and Tonga last. Additionally, during the course of my research, I became aware of changes taking place in Japan vis-a-vis its free and open Indo-Pacific vision for the Western Indian Ocean basin. In short, Tokyo's foreign policymakers, particularly at METI, appear to be focusing less on economic and transport corridor development and more on region-wide initiatives. A holistic development and Japanese foreign policy approach to East Africa thus appears to be taking shape. This means that a regional focus that encompasses but also moves beyond all 5 corridors is optimal vis-a-vis Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision. Accordingly, I offer the following 3 suggestions in conclusion. First, strategic planning and consideration are advised in relation to at least 3 important and fast-developing corridors far to the north of Lamu. These are Berbera in the independent Republic of Somaliland, which is formerly part of Somalia, Djibouti, and Massawa and Assab in Eritrea. This would be complementary to the future planning and policy development advised in relations to East Africa's corridors. It would also consider the ongoing changes in Tokyo to Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision. Djibouti, as previously noted, is the focus of large-scale development and the source of 95% of Ethiopia's imports. Berbera's port is expanding rapidly and forms a viable corridor into eastern Ethiopia with a population of over 30 million people. And finally, Massawa and Assab are moribund ports, but both are earmarked for development on account of Ethiopia's recent rapprochement with Eritrea. Now, the second point I have is that further consideration of economic and transport corridors to the south of Nacala in Mozambique is also advised. These are Maputo, the capital of Mozambique and major port, Durban in South Africa, these 2 here. Zambia's important copper mines, as I mentioned, still send copper either southeast to Maputo or south to Durban. Heavy Chinese investment in the copper belt has put pressure on transport groups to move copper west through Angola. Japan has significant stakes in mineral resources in Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa already. It seems likely that Tokyo's policymakers will be interested in supporting and perhaps enhancing these interests. As such, consideration of the key ports of Maputo and Durban, as well as the transport corridors connected to them, may prove useful. Lastly, a survey of inland transport corridors and facilities, such as inland container depots, may be desirable. This would consider transport routes running from Ethiopia towards South Sudan and then south into Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and thence into Zambia and to points further south and west. Thus far, strategies, policymaking, and development initiatives related to Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision have justifiably focused on maritime spaces and ports. The critical importance of landlocked African states should nevertheless not be underestimated. Those are my comments for today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'll take some questions now. Thank you very much. South Africa. I'll take some questions now. Thank you very much.
はい、キャノン先生、ありがとうございました。それではまず、質疑に入る前に、キャノン先生からご挨拶をお願いしたいと思います。
There we go.
Yep.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me today. Greetings from Abu Dhabi. My name is Brendan Cannon. I teach at Khalifa University here in the United Arab Emirates. I specialize in international politics, security studies, and geopolitics, and look primarily at the Western Indian Ocean basin, East Africa, and the policies of external states such as Japan.
皆様、こんにちは。ブレンドン・キャノンです。カリフォルニア大学の国際市民安全保障研究所の助教授を務めておりまして、東アジアの開発についてのご話をさせていただいております。Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so that's really much about me. I've looked closely at the Indo-Pacific corridor in particular. Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific, and given my time spent in the Eastern Africa region, Kenya primarily, but also Somaliland, Ethiopia, and Uganda, I have a great interest in this subject, understanding as I do, at least peripherally, the importance of transport corridors in this region.
はい。日本の、開かれたインド、アフリカ、インド、ジャパシフィックの、ことに関して、東アジアとの関連について述べさせていただきまして、エチオピアですとか、ウガンダについて、今回述べさせていただいております。Please.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I think that's probably enough about me. I'm happy to take questions from the audience and respond. I know there's a lot of interest in this region amongst the people who are listening in. So please field some questions for me, and I'll try my best to answer them.
私のプレゼンテーションを、興味を持ってお聞きいただけたら幸いだと思います。ここからはですね、ご質問をお受けしたいと思いますので、どうぞお気軽にいろいろご質問いただいて、できる限り私の方で回答させていただければと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、どうもありがとうございました。現在すでに12もの質問を頂戴しております。ちょっと全部お答えいただけるかどうか心もとないので、キャノン先生には短くお答えいただきたいと思います。まず最初の質問。Go ahead, please.
Okay, so far there is already more than 12 of the questions here we received. So we are not sure that all the questions you can be answered during this session, but so far, let's start.
Okay. Well, I did receive quite a few questions. One of them was related to migrants seeking jobs, political economic instability, and climate change push factors, such as human migration and nomadic existence. Do you want to translate that first, and then I can begin to answer it?
すでに民族間の関係に関してですとか、気候変動に関してですとか、そういったようなことでいろいろ英語でもご質問を受けていますけれども、これを訳すところから始めますか。
じゃあまず私の方から、質問をまず日本語で全部読み上げることにいたします。まず最初の質問。
中山さん will translate the questions in Japanese.
はい。第1問目です。エチオピアは内陸国で、国外との物流の9割がジブチ経由になっています。一方、海に面するエリトリアとの関係が改善したため、同国がアッサブ港、マッサワ港を物流に使える可能性が出てきたと言われているが、この可能性にどれくらい期待ができるか。以上です。
So as a landlocked country, Ethiopia is 90% dependent on Djibouti for its foreign trade. However, with the country's relations with Eritrea having a significant country being improved, people say that the use of Assab port and Massawa port are becoming likely. What do you think? Do you agree with this?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Look, the port of Massawa, which is close to Eritrea's capital, was a major port when Ethiopia was not landlocked prior to Eritrea's independence in 1993. My answer to the question briefly is that the roads leading from Ethiopia through Eritrea to the port of Massawa pass through Mekelle, which is the capital of the Tigray state. Go ahead and translate that, and I can continue.
大変いい質問だと思います。エチオピアのですね、エリトリアのマサワからエチオピアにかけてのルートですね、話に上っているものでありますけれども、こちらに関しては非常に重要なものになると思います。Sorry, Mr. Cannon, would you please repeat your final portion of your answer?
Yes, so while Massawa is a somewhat viable port for Ethiopian exports and imports, the problem is that the roads that lead from Ethiopia into the port of Massawa go through Mekelle. This is the capital of the Tigray state. Tigray and Ethiopia and Eritrea are involved in a major conflict right now. As such, this does not represent a viable corridor until that conflict is resolved.
はい、マサワからのですね、ルートに関しては、非常に有効だと思うんですけども、道路のですね、状況、あるいはその内部の紛争等の状況にですね、若干障害があるように感じております。
Yeah, and to answer the second part, which was about the port of Assab, while the United Arab Emirates has dredged the port and it now accepts deep water vessels, or at least a 10-meter draft or so, this port is very close to Djibouti, so there's not a lot of reason to utilize Assab when Ethiopia already utilizes Djibouti. So the proximity to Djibouti somewhat cancels its worth.
はい、アサブ港の重要性も、あると思うんですけれども、やはりジブチに非常に近いということもあってですね、どちらかというとジブチ港によって、十分、機能は、カバーされてしまうのではないかということで、なかなかその、アサブ港の方にですね、力がいくというのは、ちょっと難しいかもしれないなというふうに考えています。
Now, can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
There's the more promising option and the alternative to Djibouti right now is the port of Berbera, which I mentioned in my presentation briefly, in the Republic of Somaliland. Currently, DP World, large ports operator from Dubai, is expanding that port. Now, this would serve the eastern regions of Ethiopia. It's a different region than the ports of Massawa and Assab, but nonetheless, that represents likely the most viable alternative at this point to Djibouti.
Excuse me, Mr. Cannon, you said the DP World?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, what is the DP World?
It is a ports operator from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates.
I see. はい。あとですね、付け加えさせていただくと、DP ワールドというユナイテッド・エミレーツとの間のですね、ものにおいて、バルバラという、私の、プレゼンテーションの中にも出てきたところですけど、そちらの方もですね、一つの新たなですね、選択肢になるのではないかなと考えております。
はい、ありがとうございました。次の質問は、モンバサ・ダレッサラーム・タンガの優先順位評価について、多要素解析手法を採用されましたかということですが、これは私が知ってるんで、私の方から回答できますけれども、多要素解析手法は採用されませんでしたので、これは特に、キャノン先生にお答えいただく必要はないと思います。したがって、この部分の翻訳も結構です。次の質問に移りたいと思います。民族間関係や国内の人材状況などの文化的、社会的側面について、今回の評価において考慮されている部分はありますか？お願いします。
So, Mr. Cannon, did you consider about any ethnic relations regarding the culture or domestic human resources, such kind of cultural aspects in this consideration?
That's a good question. Look, I want to be very clear. This was a preliminary research project that was utilized to understand whether further research is needed into these corridors. So I want to make that very clear. But certainly, cultural and ethnic relations, the cultural milieu, are fundamental to looking at corridors in this region as they would be any place else. I'll let you translate that part, please, and then I'll finish.
大変良い質問だと思います。事前の、今回のこういった回廊に関するリサーチにおいても、調べたことですけども、文化的、人種的な、影響ということに関してはですね、そのファンダメンタルについて、この回廊との関係を、かなり考慮して考えました。
Yeah, and so to continue, look, particularly the political and economic cultures that have developed in East Africa were looked at. So the political culture in a place like Kenya, for 50 years since independence, has been largely a free market economy. It's one of the reasons why Japan has focused so heavily in the Mombasa and Nairobi corridor. You look at next door Tanzania, the political and economic culture are very, very different. You're looking at a mild form of socialism back in the 1960s and 70s, and still a much more controlling environment as far as the ruling party is concerned. Something similar could be said for Ethiopia, but even more authoritarian, of course. So political and economic cultures played a big role in evaluating the corridors.
政治的、経済的なですね、開発において、ケニアにおいてはですね、ここ50年にわたって、フリーマーケット、自由主義の中でですね、行われてきたというのがありますが、モンバサ・ナイロビの回廊に関して、1960年、70年代においては、社会主義下にあったということがあってですね、そういったことが多く影響しているのかなと思います。
はい、それでは次の質問に移らせていただきます。ご提案のアフリカの物流輸出関係および産業関係者からのフィードバックはどのようなものでしたか。お願いします。
So, do you have any feedback from the export and industrial participants for this on this regard?
Well, the short answer is very little. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we are all suffering from and continue to do, I was unable to travel to the region for this particular research project. So much of the information I received was from interviews I conducted, from previous observations when I have been in the region, as well as desktop research. So unfortunately, I've received very little from industry and other representatives. I'll finish my answer after you translate that.
このご質問に関してはですね、答えられることがあまり多くなくて大変申し訳ないんですが、ご存知の通り、COVID-19 の、参加のもとですね、実際に現地を訪ねて調査するというようなことがなかなかできませんでしたので、事前調査において、インタビューしたような内容に基づいて、今回のことは、考察を行っておりますので、実際のですね、産業及び、輸出関係のですね、関係者の方々の具体的なお話というのはあまり聞けてないというのが事実です。
Now, to continue, I would say that industry representatives and certainly government representatives seem to have a great deal of interest in further investment and development of corridors by a country like Japan. I just read an article yesterday about the Lamu port, Kenya Ports Authority, which operates both the Mombasa port and is building the Lamu port, desires further financing. It's having a very difficult time getting that, both in country and externally. And so there's a desire amongst industry and government to develop these corridors further. But funding and development opportunities are in short supply at this time.
付け加えさせていただきますと、ただしですね、政治関係、政治家関係ですとか、あと、産業界のですね、トップクラスの方々との、声という意味ではですね、特に、ラムポートやですね、モンバサに関してはですね、非常に日本からのですね、開発に対する投資等が行われることに対して強い関心を持っておりますし、実際にですね、昨日ですかね、So, Mr. Cannon, did you say that did you have a contact yesterday with the Lamu port?
Wasn't a contact. I found an article related to Lamu port with reporting from there.
そう、つい、この直近でですね、ランポートの、関係者の方と、連絡を取ったんですが、やはりそのファイナンシング、日本とかそういった国からですね、していただくということに関して、強い関心を、あるいは要望を持っているということは付け加えさせていただきたいと思います。
Now, if I can continue, interestingly, that report also noted that Kenya Ports Authority had recently had to pay back a very large amount of loans. I think it was 100 million or 300 million euros in loans to JICA. And so, again, this is for projects ongoing over decades, particularly at Mombasa. So there's an area here where Kenya Ports Authority desires more development and is supported by the Kenyan government, but there's also hesitation on the part of donor countries, whether that's Japan or even China now, where there's somewhat some fatigue involved, given building of infrastructure that is then either not used optimally or is never connected to infrastructure further inland. And I can talk more about that as well when you finish. Thank you.
特にですね、ケニアポートオーソリティという言い方をされてましたけども、ところからはですね、やはり過去にわたっても、100から300万、ドルですかね、における、JICA などを通してですね、投資が行われてきておりますし、そういった、投資をですね、今後も継続して行っていただくこと、またですね、港湾地区だけでなく、インランド、内陸部の方のですね、関しての、開発に関してもですね、より力を貸していただきたいというようなことだったというようなことです。
And let me just give you an example of this. So Japanese companies such as Japan Ports Consulting, Nihon Koei, and others have worked to expand the Mombasa port. Part of the issue here is you have a port, you have that's been built, you have gantry cranes that are supposed to take the cargo off ships. They're then supposed to load it onto a standard gauge railway, which has been built by China. Okay, the infrastructure exists, but the problem is that the connection between ships and gantry cranes and trains is not being connected well. And thus, the movement of freight from the port of Mombasa inland to inland container depots in Nairobi is hampered greatly. The Chinese are aware of this, the Japanese are aware of this, the Kenyans are aware of this. And it's these type of conundrums, whether there's some sectoral competition in Kenya or other problems that hamper the real optimal development of these corridors. Thank you.
あとモンバサ港とかに関してはですね、非常に実際に船がついてコンテナが来て、それをまた内陸に入れてですね、列車に乗せるというようなルートは出来上がっているものですね。現実的にはそこでコンテナを下ろし、そのガントリクレーンでですね、積み下ろして、それを電車に乗せるという流れ自体がですね、そんなにスムーズにいっているわけではないということでですね、これに関しては日本であろうと、あるいは中国であろうと、あるいは実際にケニアのですね、方であろうと気づいているんですけれども、ここに関してもっと改善が必要であろうと思っています。
はい、それでは次の質問に移ります。相互の仕事を求める移民、政治的・経済的不安定性及び気候変動によるプッシュ要因での人の移動、遊牧民の存在などはどのように分析に反映されていますか。お願いします。
Okay, so Mr. Cannon, next question is people mutually seeking the jobs or the people immigrants from the other countries or people so-called nomado. Such kind of people's influence. How you put that kind of influence into this consideration?
Okay, well, again, this was a preliminary report. Certainly, as I've mentioned already, political and economic factors such as instability were taken into account. This is particularly true in the case of the Nacala corridor in Mozambique, both political and economic instability have played a major role in really destroying the potential that that corridor had. Please translate that, and I'll continue. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Cannon, could you ask me again? What you say destroyed?
Political and economic instability in Mozambique.
I see, yeah. 今のお話の中ですね、もちろんやはり非常にこの回廊の形成に関して影響を与えることだと思いますけど、やっぱり政治的、経済的不安定性というものがですね、こういった開発を非常にですね、悪影響を与えているということになるかと思います。
Now, the issues of migration or nomadic existence also have played a role in certain regions. I'll use the case of Kenya again. The issue of developing oil, for example, in northwestern Kenya, and the export of that oil to the port of Lamu. Nomadic existence and the local population pressures have played a major role in hampering the development of oil export in that region. And so certainly migration and nomadic existence has been reflected in this analysis.
そういった形のですね、移民ですとかノマド的な方々の存在というのは、やはり例えばオイル開発なんかにとってもですね、ランポートとかそういうところにおいてですね、大きなある意味マイナスの影響をもたらす要因になっていると言わざるを得ないと思います。
The last thing I'll say on that is the quest for employment, jobs. This always plays a major role in development projects, whether that's building a railroad in Tanzania or whether that's developing a port in Mozambique. Often the promise of jobs and money coming into the local economies never really surfaces. It never materializes. And this is one of the problems. I hear lots of complaints in certain areas, in Kenya, for example, where they've attempted to develop oil resources. And again, the promise is there, but there's no money flowing into the local economy. People wonder where the jobs are.
ですから、そういうような状況の中においてですね、開発を行うことによって雇用の要求に対して応えていくこと、タンザニアでもですね、そうですけども、そういった雇用の安定とかつながっていくことが重要なんだと思いますけども、実際にその開発されたお金とかがですね、現実的には彼らの、いわゆる労働賃金という形でですね、きちっと反映されてきてないというところが問題点なんではないかなと思います。
はい、それでは次の質問に移りたいと思います。アフリカでは民営化などの規制緩和を含めて、さまざまな背景での土地の収奪がさらにさまざまな問題を起こしていますが、この点についてはどのように対応することが可能ですか。お願いします。
Okay, so in Africa, we can hear that there's some privatization happen, and but those kind of profit gained from that kind of privatization is obtained by some kind of countries or some limited persons, or those kind of things might be a very big problem. What do you think?
The question is unclear to me. Are we talking about?
Sorry, I mean, in short way, profit from privatization might be dominated by country top peoples or some limited majority minority people. I mean, so sorry. So those kind of profit gained from the privatization is not spread into the people in common.
If I understand the question correctly, we're looking at privatizing of public resources. So toll roads rather than roads that are used freely, for example. There's no doubt that there's a major issue there, not just in this region in Eastern Africa, but around the globe, how much to privatize, how much to maintain a public presence in the economic and transport sphere. We're seeing this probably the most in a place like Kenya, which has the most free market economy in East Africa. But I'm not sure from the question if there's something specific that they're asking about that. I don't know that necessarily development of transport corridors, it's always going to entail something related to somebody will gain and somebody might lose. But overall, I believe the development of transport corridors across this vast region is a good thing, just simply because existing transport corridors are insufficient to handle the amount of traffic at this time.
すみません、私自身のちょっと訳し方もよくなかったと思うんですけども、キャノン先生の方がですね、完全にちょっと自分で、質問を理解しているかどうかわからないという中で、お答えいただきましたけども、ある程度そういった民営化というような形がね、行われていく中において、利益を得るものもあれば、ロスを得るものもあるということは、致し方ないことだと思う部分もあるかなと。ただし、今現在あるですね、回廊、というものの状況というのはですね、決して十分な状態ではなくてですね、今後もそれに関してですね、さらなる開発が進められていかなければならないんだと思います。
はい、それでは次の質問に移りたいと思います。気候変動を緩和するために脱炭素のための指針が取られようとしていますが、石油や資源開発に関しての将来性と、それらが位置する国々が脆弱国家であるということが多いという背景を考慮した上で、今回の評価はなされていますかという質問です。
So, for this presentation, have you considered about the climate change or CO2? Those kind of things do you think about when you make this report?
The short answer is no. So the longer answer would be, look, while these are very, very important for industrialized countries with postmodern economies like Japan and European states, this is frankly much less important as far as development in a place like East Africa. So the Sustainable Development Goals, while we should all strive for those, is not something that is necessarily, I think, as important given the low levels of carbon and other pollutants being put in the air from these regions anyway. So I think this is probably something that should take precedence after the corridors are developed. That would be my longer answer.
このご質問に関しては、端的に答えると、答えをという形になってしまうんですけども、やはり工業化された国、ヨーロッパ各国だったりとかですね、日本、米国もそうでしょうけれども、そういうことに関して脱炭素であったりとか、そういったことに関しては非常に重要だと思いますが、この東アフリカの現在の状況においてはですね、やはりこういった回廊の開発とかそういうことが、きちっと行われた後にですね、初めてそういったことが、考慮されてくるということになるのではないかなと、長く答えるとすればそういう形になると思います。
はい、ありがとうございました。次の質問なんですけど、ちょっと時間がだいぶ、足りなくなってきてるんで、 私が訳せるところは、質問は私の方で英語で訳して読みますので、通訳の方、すみません、彼の英語の回答だけ訳していただければと思います。
了解しました。
はい、次の質問は内陸部と海岸部の接続について、効果と効率性について、経済、社会など多面な影響があると思いますが、評価はどのようになされていますか。Dr. Cannon, the next question is like this. How do you evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of the connection between inland and coastal area, which will have a multi-faceted impact on the economy and society? Please.
Okay, well, as I'll mention again, this is a preliminary report, and I am not a logistics expert. I am a political scientist and an academic who was asked to do this. So there are people who are much more qualified to carry out actual logistics measurements and understand better. What I utilized, again, was my previous research stretching back nearly 10 years, looking at transport corridors, particularly in the East African communities, so Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and understanding from interviews and observations where there are issues such as the aforementioned problem with the Mombasa port and the standard gauge railway, but also issues of terrain, so the geography of the place, how difficult it is, as well as issues of political and economic culture. So those were evaluated rather than sending in a logistics team. And that's something that would be done, of course, by an arm of the Japanese government if they were interested in looking at developing the Lamu corridor, for example.
今の質問に関してはですね、笑いながら私は政治科学者ではないので、なかなかちょっと答えがしづらいという形のところであるというふうにおっしゃってましたけれども、10年間ぐらいのですね、事前調査にあたって、ケニア、ウガンダ、タンザニアとかのインタビューをしてきたところにおいてはですね、そういった部分はですね、Dr. Cannon, please let me share your final conclusion in your phrase.
Yeah, so if for example, JICA was interested in developing the Lamu corridor, they of course would send in a logistics team to evaluate this in a way that I would be unable to do. And so my baseline evaluation would be to inform development partners in places like Japan whether these corridors, Lamu, Nacala, Tonga, represent viable corridors.
いや、私のですね、結論としては、こういったJICA とかを通して、こういった形に、開発、されてきた、いろいろなさまざまな港であったり、回廊に関してはですね、非常に、これからも重要であろうと思っています。
はい、ありがとうございます。それでは次の質問に移りたいと思います。同じやり方でいきます。
はい、
東アフリカにはインドとの関係性も大きいですが、中国以外のさまざまな国の投資や人々の参入について評価を行う上で考慮されていますか？ The question is like this. In East Africa, there is a great relationship with India, but do you take into account the investment and the people from various countries other than China in your evaluation, please?
Well, that's a very good question. Interestingly enough, in about 2 hours, I'll be speaking on other external states like Turkey and the United Arab Emirates and their actions in this region at another seminar. So absolutely, those were taken into place. Yeah, go ahead, please, and then I'll finish.
Okay, so これはですね、もう話すと2時間ぐらいかかってしまうような話になってしまうと思うんですけど、UAE ですとかトルコとかがかかってくる話になると思いますが、Okay, please.
Yeah, so you raised the issue of India. That's a very interesting case. Yes, there's a large Indian diaspora population in a place like Kenya. It plays a very important political and economic role. Yes, relations between India and a country like Kenya are warm. Nonetheless, India as a development partner is a new prospect. It's also one that is politically charged given the Indian diaspora population. So it's a two-way street here, and it can go negative or positive.
このレイス人種問題というのはですね、特にケニアのインディアンでしょうか、そういった方もですね、開発パートナーとして、関わってくるわけですけれども、そこのインパクトというのは非常にポジティブな部分もあり、ネガティブな部分もあるという形になると思います。
I think to continue, the fact that other states such as Turkey are operating to a much higher degree in the region than they did 10 years ago is evidence that Eastern Africa is not only open to China. It certainly remains open for development prospects and economic growth to other countries. And so I think that our overemphasis on Chinese investment and development of the region is probably misguided.
10年ぐらい前から考えてみるとですね、トルコ、中国に対してのみ、オープンな形でですね、やってきたという部分が、ありまして、そういったものがですね、これからもですね、同じような形で、偏重されるような形になっていくと、問題は大きくなるのではないかなと思います。
はい、どうもありがとうございました。それでは次の質問に移りたいと思います。次の質問を2つのパートに分かれてるんですけれども、まず最初の方は、湖や周辺国の物流や人の流れにも関係していると思いますが、川や湖などの役割をどのように捉えておられますか？ The question is, lakes are also related to logistics and human flows in neighboring countries. But how do you see the role of rivers and lakes, please?
That's a good question. So lakes have been used in previous times as continuations of transport corridors. That includes Lake Tanganyika, that includes Lake Victoria. This has been an ongoing discussion in the East African community, how to utilize lake transport. Nothing has really come of that, to my knowledge, at this time, given just issues of funding as well as mistrust between the East African community members.
大変こちらもいい質問だと思います。以前からですね、タンガニア湖ですとか、ビクトリア湖とか、そういった湖のですね、トランスポーテーション、輸送というのは、非常に注目されておりましたけれどもですね、そういった湖上輸送というものに関してはですね、私の知る限り、大きな発展は今のところ起きていないという形になります。
Now, in terms of rivers, I think this is a prospect that is limited, as I mentioned in my presentation. However, there are areas that could be looked at for riverine transport. I'm thinking in particular into places like Western Ethiopia, where you have a river around the town of Gambela that flows in a southwesterly direction to the White Nile in South Sudan. There was talk when I was in Juba a few years ago about having the Egyptians or some other country come in and dredge that river so it could be used for river transport in order to allow South Sudan another economic corridor. So I think there are rivers that do represent small economic corridors, if you will.
今度河川、川のですね、流通、輸送についてですけども、こちらはですね、やはりプレゼンテーションの中で説明したように、非常に地形的に難しい部分もあるんですけども、ポシビリティがないというわけではなく、エチオピアのガンベラ か、そういったところですとか、徐々にですね、そういった川を、有効的に利用していくということは、進んでいると思いますけれども、まだまだ非常にですね、困難を伴う部分が多いのかなと思います。
はい、ありがとうございました。次に移りたいと思います。現在の鉄道の利用はかなり限られていると思いますが、国や地域によるものの今後の鉄道に関する展望をどのように考えていらっしゃいますか？ The question is, I believe that the current use of railroads is quite limited, while it depends on the country and region. But what are your thoughts on the future prospects for railroads, please?
Yeah, very good question. That's absolutely right. Rail traffic is limited. The railroads are either old and therefore underutilized, such as the Chinese-built railroad in Tanzania that was built in the 1970s that goes to Zambia, or they're new, like the standard gauge railways that China has built in Kenya from Mombasa to Nairobi, or in Ethiopia from the port of Djibouti to Addis Ababa, that represent potentially huge gains as far as transport are concerned, but particularly in the case of Kenya, are underutilized as far as freight for some of the reasons I've already mentioned.
鉄道による輸送というものはですね、やはりどうしてもある程度限られていて、チャイニーズ、中国の、投資によってですね、非常にスタンダードゲージによる鉄道の整備等が行われてはいますけれども、なかなかですね、そのフレート運賃の問題でですね、なかなか大きな利益が得られないという点に問題点があるのかなと思います。
Now, in the case of Ethiopia, China has indicated that it's willing to invest quite substantially in the future. In the case of Kenya, it has withdrawn many of its promises. So what we have now is a situation where the railroad that was supposed to be built from the port of Mombasa all the way through to Uganda and then into Rwanda in the Great Lakes region is now stuck somewhere in between Nairobi and the Ugandan border. So these states are still very dependent in many respects on getting the outside funding to build these railroads. And when that disappears, then you run into problems whereby the project never gets completed in the way it was supposed to.
ケニアにおいてはですね、モンバサから、ウガンダ、ルワンダのルート等に関してですね、実際に開発していくというようなことをある程度プロミスしているというようなことがありますけれども、やっぱりファンディング、資金ですね、そういった部分においてですね、まだまだそれが非常に、安定的でないというような形であるようであります。
ありがとうございました。次の質問に参ります。空路の発展が進む中における物流の今後についてお考えを伺いたいです。I'd like to hear your thoughts on the future of logistics in the midst of the development of air route, please.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, we're talking about the development of air transport versus ground transport. Is that correct?
The question is about the air transport.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, already air freight is playing a major role in hubs like Nairobi that have viable airlines, albeit with problems, such as Kenya Airways. The same thing goes for Ethiopia with Ethiopian Airways. So the amount of air freight, if you will, leaving both Addis Ababa and Nairobi is significant on a daily basis. The air transport, let me stop there and then we can continue.
Okay, エアフレイト、航空によるですね、貨物輸送ということに関してはですね、エチオピアでもエチオピアエアウェイというようなものがありますけれども、やはり、まずはやっぱり、 航空運賃というものがですね、大きなネックになってくるのかなと思います。Okay, please.
Yeah, but air transport is just, of course, much more expensive than rail or road transport, and just cannot take the place, even for a limited time, of those options. So again, for the local goods, the local movement of goods within Kenya itself, let's use that case, but as well as into the East African community, places like Uganda, South Sudan, and Rwanda. The real optimal solution here would be a robust rail network going through all of those countries, complemented by a roads network and pipelines and related things. So all of those that I mentioned need to be developed further in order to make this optimal.
やはりですね、空路輸送ということに関しては、まずやっぱりその、高価な運賃ということが非常にネックになってきて、鉄道輸送というものに、ね、なかなか取って代わるということは、今の段階ではできないのかなと思いますし、やっぱりロード、道上での、トラック輸送ということでしょうかね、とか、パイプラインであるとか、そういったものがですね、使われてきます。そういうものが、開発するということが、まず、先になるのかなと思います。
はい、ありがとうございました。次の質問に参ります。これ、質問を英語でいただいてるんですけど、まず日本語訳の方から読んで、それから英語のご質問を読みます。日本は中国の一帯一路に対抗するために質の高いインフラ整備を推進しています。質の高いインフラは確かにコストがかかるかもしれませんが、長持ちする可能性があります。このような日本の取り組みは東アフリカの開発にも有効だと思いますか？ The question is, Japan is promoting high-quality infrastructure initiatives with a view to countering the BRI of China. High-quality infrastructure may certainly cost, but could live longer. Do you think the initiatives led by Japan is valid in the context of development of East Africa? Please.
This is a great question. This is the constant conundrum. So yes, you've got on the one hand Chinese-led development, which is often carried out at high costs, but done very quickly. Okay, and you have on the other hand very high-quality infrastructure that is put in place by Japan, that is funded for almost nothing, but takes a very long time to build. And interestingly enough, my wife and I were just talking the other day. She's from Kenya. We were talking about the two sections of a road in Nairobi that have been built. One of the sections was built by the Japanese. One of the sections was built by the Chinese. And I'll stop there and then continue, please.
中国によるですね、確かに非常に早い、コストはあるとするようですけども、早い、クイックな、開発というのもですね、ありますが、それに対して非常にハイクオリティだけども、日本によるような、ハイクオリティだけども、ロングタイム、長い時間のかかる、開発というものに対して、やはり評価というのは分かれるのかなと思いますけども、例えばですね、ナイロビにですね、2つのセクションがあって、ジャパンがやったところと中国がやったところというようなことがございます。Please continue.
Yeah, so this road, there was a something posted on social media about it, and the Kenyans posting were talking about how beautiful the Japanese road was and how the pedestrians and bicyclists had been taken into account. The drainage of water was taken into account, and then they were complaining about the Chinese-made road, which, while it was built very fast, didn't take into account any of those things. And so I think those are the two sides of the coin. And I'll continue after you're done.
確かに日本のやった部分というのはですね、非常に美しくてですね、きれいに出来上がっていて、また歩道とかがですね、ペデストリアンロードがきちっとしていたり、側溝とかがですね、きちっと作られていたりという部分で、やっぱりクオリティ高いというふうに思います。一方、チャイナの、やった部分というのは、非常にやっぱそういった部分に及ばないにしても非常に早く 時間的にですね、早くできるというところの、その二面性、2つの面をですね、どう評価するかということになるのかと思います。
Now, the political economy of infrastructure building in East Africa, of course, has the local component. And it would seem intuitive or intelligent for Kenya, for example, or Tanzania to work with JICA and Japanese companies to develop, to build quality infrastructure, even if it takes many, many years. However, there's a political shelf life here. You have elected officials in many of these states. There's a time limit. They want to take credit for projects. This plays into their considerations of Chinese projects as well. And I'm going to continue after this as well.
Okay. やっぱりインフラを建築するということに関してですね、特にそのローカルなエリアにおいてはですね、例えばケニアですとかタンザニアなんかでもそうですけども、JICA というような日本のようなところがやってくれるようなですね、非常に丁寧な、しかし非常に長い、目に何年もの期間がかかるというものとですね、やっぱり時間的なタイムリミットがある中でですね、中国の形で非常に早く仕上げてくれるということに関しても、それが重要性を持つこともあるのかなと思います。Okay, please.
Yes, and so there's also the factor of what's in it for us. So the people making decisions about infrastructure may find a better deal from, say, the Chinese or the Turks or the Americans rather than the Japanese. That could come in all shapes and sizes. I don't think I need to go into details about that. Suffice to say that this is one of the reasons why we do see different development partners chosen for different development projects.
やはりですね、実際にそこにいるインフラから方々がですね、そこのニーズに基づいて判断することかと思いますけども、やっぱり、チャイナであったり、あるいはアメリカであったり、日本だったり、その実際に開発する相手国とですね、関係の中においてですね、何をもって重要性とするかということは考えていくことになるのかなと思います。
And lastly, to answer the question, is high quality infrastructure an option? I think it absolutely is. There are places, corridors, portions of corridors that Japan and it can definitely play a role in developing. That being said, I don't see the rationale for Japan to build infrastructure on the scale of China at this point. And I've written about this at length in some of the papers and chapters I've written, but Japan is operating on a totally different level than China is as far as politics and economy, etc. And so, yes, I think there's a role for high quality infrastructure, absolutely. There's probably room for an expanded role, but Japan should not compete with China. It just doesn't have the rationale to do so.
最後にやはり、改めて付け加えさせていただきますと、日本のやる、行うもの、というものはですね、非常にやっぱりハイクオリティであってですね、それはもう非常に高いレベルにあって、中国の行うそれとはある意味比べ物にならない、ような形のものでありますし、正直言ってそういった、ハイクオリティのものがですね、将来的なことを考えて、よりベターであるというのはですね、私としては、そういうことは必要だろうと思います。
はい、どうもありがとうございました。時間になりましたので、これにて質疑を終わりたいと思います。まだ質問2つ残ってるんですけれども、ごめんなさい。その質問を寄せられた方にお詫びいたします。本日は、30分セッションの開始を遅らせざるを得なかったということにつきまして、改めまして深くお詫び申し上げます。皆様のご参加に深く感謝申し上げます。それでは本日の会をこれで閉じたいと思います。どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. So it's time to finish. So thank you very much for all the participants. And sorry we cannot answer all of the questions, but thank you very much for Dr. Cannon. So this is the end of this seminar.
Well, thank you for all the good questions. I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor and pleasure. I look forward to engaging further, hopefully in Japan at the end of the year. And thanks again. I've enjoyed this very, very much.
本当に皆さん参加いただきありがとうございました。また非常に貴重な質問、興味深い質問をいただきましてですね、私もこの場でこういった形で答えさせていただくことで、は非常に誇らしい思いをさせていただいて、これからもですね、よりこういった東アフリカとですね、アジア、日本との関係に関してですね、より掘り下げて関わっていきたいと思っておりますので、引き続きよろしくお願いいたします。本日は本当にありがとうございました。